Okay, so let's tackle something that I think we probably all struggle with from time to time, and that is procrastination. You know that feeling when you have something you really need to do, a deadline's coming up, but suddenly any other task seems so much more appealing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's such a universal struggle, and uh, today we're going to delve into some really fascinating insights from neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman, and he's done some incredible work on how our brains really work when it comes to motivation and reward.
Oh, I'm so intrigued by that because I always thought procrastination was kind of just like a personality flaw or just laziness or a lack of willpower.
Hmm.
But are you saying there's like an actual neurological component to it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, Huberman's research suggests that procrastination is very often linked to these fluctuations we have in dopamine, that neurotransmitter that's associated with pleasure and motivation.
Okay, so is it basically like we're constantly chasing that dopamine high, and so we put off tasks that don't give us that immediate sense of reward?
It's definitely a part of it. Yeah. So, Huberman explains that when we do engage in activities that we enjoy, we get this surge of dopamine, right? But then what follows is the inevitable dip, and that leaves us feeling really unmotivated and much less inclined to tackle those tasks that are maybe a little bit less thrilling.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. But then how do we break free from this dopamine roller coaster? You know, if we're constantly chasing that high, it just seems like procrastination would be this never-ending cycle.
Yeah, and you've hit on a key point there, and this is where Huberman's approach gets really interesting. He suggests that instead of waiting for the motivation to strike us, we could kind of intentionally do something challenging or even a little bit unpleasant.
Wait, so you're suggesting that we should intentionally make ourselves uncomfortable? That seems kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, it might seem a bit strange, but
Yeah.
he calls this limbic friction.
Mm.
And the idea is that by pushing against that resistance that's in our brains,
Hmm.
we can actually help ourselves to kind of climb out of that dopamine slump faster.
Okay, so give me an example. Like, how does this limbic friction work in practice?
Okay, well, he uses the example of someone who hates exercise.
Yeah.
They might force themselves to do a few minutes, even though their brain is screaming no. And it's not about punishing themselves. It's more about giving their dopamine system this jump start.
I'm starting to see the logic in that, but I know there are days when like even the thought of a few minutes of exercise feels completely insurmountable. So what about those times when even the smallest challenge feels totally overwhelming?
Yeah, well, he suggests actually taking it a step further and proposing that we find something even more challenging, something that you truly dread. He calls it your cold shower equivalent.
You're suggesting a cold shower as a productivity hack.
Yeah, it's more the principle behind it. So,
Yeah.
the idea is that by doing something even as simple as a cold shower, you create this significant dopamine drop and you trigger a faster rebound, and it kind of leaves you feeling more alert and energized.
So I'm intrigued by this idea of using discomfort as a tool for motivation. But how do we apply this to our everyday lives? I mean, not every task has this sort of cold shower equivalent.
Yeah, and that's where the challenge lies and the opportunity for personal growth.
Yeah.
We need to figure out what those personal limbic friction points are for us. What are the tasks or the activities that make you cringe at the very thought of them?
Hmm.
Those could be your secret weapons against procrastination.
So it's not about finding a literal cold shower for every task. It's
Yeah,
about identifying those activities that create a similar level of discomfort to kind of push us past that initial resistance.
exactly.
Yeah.
The key is to find that sweet spot, that level of discomfort. That's challenging enough to really disrupt your cycle of procrastination without being totally overwhelming.
I think this is really making me rethink my whole approach to motivation because it's almost like flipping the script. Instead of, waiting for inspiration to strike, we're actively creating it through discomfort.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we actually have a lot more control over our motivation than we think we do. It's
Mhm.
not about, waiting for that perfect moment or for inspiration to strike, but it's more about taking action even when it feels counterintuitive.
So we've talked about how procrastination isn't just about, you know, laziness, but it often stems from this complex interplay of dopamine and our brain's reward system.
That's right. And we touched on Dr. Huberman's concept of limbic friction, right, where
Mm.
you're intentionally engaging in slightly uncomfortable activities, and that can actually help us to overcome procrastination.
But you also mentioned that even doing something enjoyable can be a powerful tool. So I'm curious to explore those ideas a little bit further. What are some specific examples of activities that could help us create this limbic friction without necessarily, resorting to cold showers every time we need to get something done.
Well, as we briefly touched on before, exercise can be incredibly effective. Even if you're not, a gym enthusiast or anything, a short burst of intense physical activity can do wonders for boosting your energy and focus.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I know I always feel much more alert and ready to kind of tackle my to-do list after even just a quick workout.
Exactly. And it doesn't need to be anything elaborate. A brisk walk, a few sets of push-ups, or even just some jumping jacks can be enough to get your heart rate up and give your dopamine system that jump start.
I like that it's about finding those small, manageable actions that can help shift our mental state. But what about those times when even exercise feels too daunting? Are there other, maybe less physically demanding ways to create that limbic friction?
There are, and this one might sound a bit unconventional, but Dr. Huberman suggests trying something like holding your breath.
Hold my breath seriously. How does that help with procrastination?
It might seem counterintuitive, but it's all about creating, a mild stress response in the body. So when we hold our breath, our body kind of goes into this fight or flight mode, and it triggers a release of adrenaline and other neurochemicals.
So it's like giving our system a jolt of energy, similar to the cold shower effect.
Precisely. It's a way to kind of disrupt that cycle of procrastination and shift our brains into a more alert and focused state.
I'm intrigued by that, but I have to admit the idea of intentionally holding my breath feels a little bit intimidating. Is there like a specific technique or time frame that we should aim for?
There's no need to go to extremes or anything. Dr. Huberman suggests, starting with a comfortable breath hold, maybe 15, 20 seconds, and then gradually increasing the duration as you become more comfortable. The key is just to listen to your body and not push yourself beyond your limits.
That makes sense. So next time I'm feeling stuck, I could try, taking a few deep breaths and holding the last one for a bit. It's amazing to think that such a simple action could have such a powerful impact on our motivation.
It really is, and it highlights the incredible connection between our minds and bodies. You know, by understanding these physiological mechanisms, we can actually leverage them to overcome, mental hurdles like procrastination.
I'm starting to see procrastination in a whole new light now.
Mhm.
It's not just a character flaw. It's more like a puzzle to be solved, a challenge to be met with creativity and understanding.
That's a great way to look at it. And speaking of creative approaches, there's another technique that Dr. Huberman mentions that I think you'll find quite interesting.
I'm all ears. What is it?
This one might surprise you, but it involves incorporating a sense of playfulness into our work.
Playfulness. How does that tie into productivity?
Well, Dr. Huberman explains that sometimes we procrastinate not because we lack motivation, but because the task at hand feels too serious or too overwhelming.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that when I'm faced with a large or complex project. It's easy to feel really intimidated and end up putting it off.
Exactly. And in those cases, injecting a sense of playfulness can help us approach the task with a lighter, more positive mindset.
Yeah.
It allows us to tap into our creativity and find enjoyment in the process, even if the work itself isn't inherently fun.
So it's about finding ways to make the work feel less like a chore and more like a game.
Precisely. And this can be done in various ways.
Mhm.
For example, you could try setting mini challenges for yourself, or incorporating some friendly competition with a colleague, or even rewarding yourself for completing certain milestones.
I love that it's about shifting our perspective and finding ways to make the work feel more engaging and enjoyable. It's like tricking our brains into being more productive.
It's not so much about tricking our brains as it is about working with them.
Hmm.
By understanding our natural tendencies and preferences, we can create an environment that really fosters productivity and motivation.
This is fascinating. We've gone from cold showers to holding our breath to incorporating playfulness. It seems like the key to overcoming procrastination is to have, a diverse toolkit of strategies that we can draw upon depending on this situation.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to procrastination. What works for one person might not work for another, and what works for you one day might not work the next. The key is to experiment, find what resonates with you, and be willing to adapt your approach as needed.
I appreciate that message of flexibility and self-awareness. It takes the pressure off needing to find that one perfect solution, and it empowers us to explore different strategies and find what works best for us individually.
Exactly. And it makes the journey of overcoming procrastination much more interesting and engaging. It becomes less about forcing ourselves to do something we dread and more about discovering, new ways to work with our brains and unlock our potential.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm starting to feel a sense of excitement about tackling those tasks that I used to dread. It's like a whole new world of possibilities has opened up.
That's wonderful to hear. And remember, this is just the beginning, you know? There's so much more we can explore when it comes to the science of motivation and procrastination.
Well, I'm definitely ready to dive deeper what other fascinating insights are waiting for us.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll shift gears a bit and explore the psychological factors that contribute to procrastination. We'll delve into the role of fear, perfectionism, and other emotional barriers that can kind of keep us stuck in that cycle of avoidance.
I'm intrigued. It seems like we're moving beyond the neurological level and into the realm of emotions and self-awareness.
That's right. And by understanding these deeper psychological factors, we can develop even more effective strategies for overcoming procrastination and achieving our goals.
I can't wait to explore this further. It seems like we're on the verge of uncovering some truly powerful tools for personal growth and transformation.
We are stay tuned because we're about to embark on an even deeper dive into the fascinating world of procrastination.
Okay, so we've explored some pretty fascinating strategies so far, for tackling procrastination from embracing limbic friction to even incorporating playfulness in our work.
Yeah, we've seen that procrastination isn't simply, about laziness, but often involves this really complex interplay of dopamine and our brain's reward system and even our emotions.
Right, and you've hinted that there's even more to uncover, especially on the psychological side of
Yeah,
things.
you're right. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit here and look at some of the deeper psychological factors that contribute to procrastination.
Okay, I'm ready to dive in. So what are some of those emotional barriers that can keep us stuck in that procrastination cycle?
Well, one really common culprit is fear, fear of failure, fear of judgment, or even fear of success.
That makes sense. I know for me sometimes the thought of starting a big project can feel so overwhelming that I just avoid it altogether.
Yeah, and it's a natural response. When we perceive a task as threatening, our brains kind of go into that fight or flight mode, and procrastination can become a way of protecting ourselves from that perceived threat.
So it's almost like a coping mechanism even if it's not a particularly helpful one in the long run.
Exactly. And another common psychological factor is perfectionism.
Perfectionism, the enemy of getting things done.
Indeed, perfectionists often set, such high standards for themselves that they become paralyzed by the fear of not meeting them. The task feels insurmountable, so they procrastinate to avoid that potential disappointment or criticism.
It's like they'd rather not try at all than risk not being perfect, and I think that's a trap a lot of us fall into.
It is. And then there's the issue of overwhelm. When our to-do list feels a mile long, it's easy to feel so mentally overloaded that we just kind of shut down and avoid everything.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. It's like my brain just hits a wall and says, nope, not dealing with any of this right now.
Yeah, and it's a common experience. And in those cases, procrastination becomes a way of coping with that sense of being overwhelmed. It's like a temporary escape from the pressure, even if it ultimately makes things worse.
It seems like procrastination at its core is often a way of avoiding uncomfortable feelings.
That's a very insightful observation. Whether it's fear, anxiety, or a sense of overwhelm, procrastination often serves as that temporary shield against emotional discomfort.
So how do we break free from this pattern? If procrastination is rooted in these deeper emotional issues, how do we address those underlying causes?
Well, it starts with self-awareness. Recognizing those emotional triggers that are driving your procrastination is the first step towards change.
So paying attention to those thoughts and feelings that come up when we're tempted to procrastinate.
Exactly. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What's making me want to avoid this task? And once you identify those emotional barriers, you can start to develop healthier coping mechanisms.
That makes sense. Instead of letting those feelings control us, we can learn to acknowledge them and then choose a more productive response.
Precisely. And this is where self-compassion comes in. It's about being kind to ourselves, recognizing that we're all human and we all struggle with these things.
So instead of beating ourselves up for procrastinating, we can approach it with a sense of curiosity and understanding.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective can be incredibly powerful. Instead of viewing procrastination as a personal failing, we can see it as an opportunity for growth and self-discovery.
I love that reframing it takes the shame out of the equation and empowers us to approach those challenges with a more positive and proactive mindset.
And remember, change takes time. It's not about achieving perfection overnight. It's about making small, consistent steps in the right direction.
Yeah, I appreciate that reminder. It's easy to get caught up in that all or nothing mentality, but progress over perfection is a much healthier and more sustainable approach.
Absolutely celebrate those small victories along the way. And don't be afraid to ask for support when you need it.
This conversation has been incredibly valuable. It's given me a whole new understanding of procrastination and more importantly, a sense of hope that it's something I can overcome.
You absolutely can remember you have the power to break free from procrastination and create a life that's aligned with your values and goals.
I'm feeling empowered to do just that. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights. This has been a true game changer.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, the journey doesn't end here.
Yeah.
Keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep growing.
And to all our listeners out there, I hope this deep dive has inspired you to approach procrastination with a new sense of curiosity and compassion. Remember, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. And with the right tools and mindset, you can achieve amazing things. Until next time.